Happy New Year, Carl. Hey, same to you, buddy. The 2024? Yeah, well, we're gonna move on to a new format. Oh, joy, what is it? Well, we're gonna tell one joke that's really long. All right. So, what's the joke? Okay, well, sit back and enjoy this one. This one's the Traveler's Tale. Is this some weird zoom in? What is going on?
One day a traveler was walking through the forest. This was not an unusual occurrence. The traveler walked wooded areas quite frequently and had visited this specific forest a few times before. This forest wasn't the traveler's goal, of course. It merely lay between them and the small, out of the way, completely ordinary village they called home. It had been many months since they had last returned to it, and they missed their friends and family dearly. While the traveler was alone, they were not at all unprepared for a walk through the woods. On their feet, they wore a sturdy pair of short leather hiking boots. These simple, rugged, and not particularly fashionable boots had served them well over the last 7 months, and the traveler had made sure to maintain them to the best of their ability. On their belt hung a large hunting knife. This knife wasn't actually for hunting or really killing at all. No. The traveler mainly used it for starting fires, cutting branches, and when they had the time for wood carvings of various animals which they would give as gifts to the children of their hometown upon their return. The last truly notable object they had was a small stone charm, a thin stone disc with a hole bored through the center, a short length of twine passing through the center, not quite long enough to be worn as a necklace. The traveler had worn it on their right wrist ever since it was given to them by a local witch in town they had visited a long time ago, who told them it would repel evil spirits. The traveler walked a well-worn path that they were fairly confident would lead them back home. It was only roughly a day's walk at a comfortable pace, a not at all unusual hike for the traveler. Every so often they would grab their canteen and take a small sip or two to refresh them, or open the bag of nuts hanging from their belt they had bought a few days back and eat a few, but otherwise they only had the path to occupy them. A few hours into the hike, they spotted a small white bird sitting on a low hanging branch in front of them. The bird was small and fairly round, and while mostly white, it has several brown dots across its body. The traveler thought that this bird looked quite unlike any of the birds that lived in or around this forest, and came to the conclusion that it must have traveled very far to have gotten here. After taking a few minutes to rest and admire the unusual creature, the traveler got up and started walking again. Around noon, the traveler came to a large creek, several meters wide, but only around a foot deep. They quickly took off their boots and pulled their pants up to their knees to avoid having wet shoes for the rest of the journey. As they began to walk through the creek, they walked slowly and carefully to avoid slipping. Around the halfway point, they stepped on a somewhat pointy rock, startling them and causing them to slip and fall, while they managed to catch themselves and avoid falling completely into the creek. They dropped the boots directly into the water, completely soaking them. They sighed, grabbed the boots, and walked the rest of the way out of the water. The traveler checked their foot and was glad they hadn't seriously stabbed themselves on the rock. The situation with the boots was unfortunate, but they were no stranger to walking barefoot. They would just watch their steps more carefully from now on. They continued walking for around a half an hour before they noticed a small yellow flower on the side of the path. They recognized the small yellow flower and the heart-shaped leaves of the plant, and knew it was a rare medicinal herb whose leaves had many healing properties. They picked the flower and planned to give it to their town's local herbalist, a longtime friend of theirs. A few hours later, it was late afternoon, and the traveler came upon a young fox caught in a snare. They drew their knife and planned to cut the fox free. They were a very spiritual person and followed a local sect of their religion that forbade the eating of meat and encouraged pacifism among its members. They quickly freed the fox, which ran away in a panic. The traveler then decided to rest for a few and eat a handful of nuts. Just as they were about to start moving again, they heard footsteps from back the way they had come and noticed a hunter carrying a short bow. The hunter saw the traveler and the sliced up snare and immediately began to yell at the traveler to leave immediately. The traveler was beginning to stand up when the hunter knocked an arrow and began aiming in the traveler's direction. They quickly got the rest of the way up, grabbed their boots, and ran down the path away from the hunter. A few minutes later, they checked to make sure the hunter wasn't following them and slowed down to check for their belongings. They had their boots, flask, nuts, but then they realized, in the panic, they had left their knife on the ground by the snare. They sighed. The hunter was probably walking off with their knife right now, and they had no intention of trying to get it back. There was nothing to be done about it. When they got back to their village, they would sleep through the night, then try to purchase a replacement. They continued down the path, which took them through a large clearing. With the trees out of the way, they took this chance to admire the clouds. The clouds had begun to gather and darken, and the traveler hoped this didn't mean it was going to start raining soon. As they had this thought, they passed out of the clearing and continued their journey. Luckily, it didn't rain, and they traveled uneventfully for another hour or so. That was when they saw a small, humanoid figure jump out of the trees. What looked like a woman, only with skin made of wood and hair of moss. The traveler stopped in their place, and the figure spoke. "I am the Fae that now rules these woods. I have traveled far from another forest that was razed by the evil duke that ruled a castle nearby. From now on, any who wish to pass through this forest must pay tribute or be forever cursed with misfortune." The traveler thought about what they had on them that could interest a Fae. They knew forest spirits had little interest in anything metal, so their flask wouldn't work, and Fae always went without clothes, so they couldn't offer anything they wore. They then sighed once again and begrudgingly pulled the stone charm off of their wrist and offered it to the fairy. She quickly grabbed the charm and seemed fascinated by the disc. She quickly thanked the traveler for their generous offering and promised never to bother them if they passed through these woods in the future, before jumping off to the side of the path and quickly vanishing into the brush. The barefoot traveler continued on their journey, still carrying their damp boots, at this point quite fed up with this forest. As they continued on, they looked up into the sky and thought they saw the same small white bird from that morning flying above their head. This invigorated the traveler, and they began to speed up, briskly walking the final stretch. By now, it was evening, and the sun had begun to set. The traveler had been walking all day and was ready to reach the village, eat a warm meal, meet with their friends in town, dry their boots, and hopefully find a new knife. Soon they could see fires in the distance they were fairly sure were coming from their destination, and they felt relieved. They continued walking for a few more minutes before suddenly an arrow flew and hit them in the back. The hunter from earlier ran out from the brush and began to panic and asked the traveler if they were okay. This shot was seemingly a hunting accident, and the hunter must have mistook them for game of some kind in the dark. The traveler said that they weren't hurting too badly, but that they had no experience with archery and didn't know how to judge the severity of an archery wound. The hunter apologized and offered to walk them to town and take them to the herbalist, who was fairly experienced with these kinds of wounds. As they traveled back, they began to chat about each other's lives. The traveler apologized for freeing the fox, and the hunter asked them why they hadn't ever tried archery. "Oh," said the traveler, "I thought about it, but there were too many drawbacks."
Wait, What? That was the joke. Yeah, you like it? Not as much as I really liked your audiobook voice. Yeah, that was pretty fun. I enjoyed that one. Probably do it again. Um, well, top commenters, let us know how you liked this, because I think this is what we're gonna just be doing. Woo! 10 long minutes. Probably a question for you all though. Have you ever been on a journey? Yeah, tell us a story.